Hi, welcome to Gone Fishing. I'm TJ Schwanke.
And I'm Bob Kirkpatrick. Today we're on Lake of the Woods fishing for smallmouth with crankbaits. And TJ just hooked into a real nice one here.
We're up in Echo Bay, and it's one of the areas that's really noted for smallmouth. Kenora Bass International is one of the biggest bass tournaments here, and a lot of the big monies come off this part of the lake. This is a really nice bass.
This one's really holding down. Here, let me run the boat.
Ooh, yeah.
I'm close to the rocks here. Wow.
Now you have to use barbless crankbaits here, and you got to keep tension on them. You don't lose many fish with the barbless hooks, but you do just have to keep the tension on them. There's a nice bass. It's got to be 3 pounds.
Here? I got to watch. We're getting close to the rocks here.
Okay.
Boy, that ever nice.
Get him to open his mouth here. This crankbait's kind of got him caught on both sides of the mouth. I'm just going to pick him up like this. Well, there's a Lake of the Woods bass. That's a beautiful bass.
Well, hopefully we can get a bunch of those, TJ.
You bet. And this crankbait I'm using here has got rattles in it. And he's got that hook just buried in 3 different ways. Here. I think I got it.
Yeah.
And you can kind of hear him. And that actually makes noise under the water. Now bass have a lateral line and it runs the full length of their body right here. And its purpose is to actually pick up vibrations underwater. So that's what these rattles do, is send out vibrations, and that's why we're using them. And you get this one back, and then we'll try for some more.
Well, this water is crystal clear.
You can see them way out there.
Now, the crankbait I'm using has got a white lip on it, and I can follow it all the way in. TJ's using a white crankbait, and we can see that the whole distance.
I've had really good luck with white crankbaits. I find them probably one of the best bass colors I've used. That's a nice smallmouth.
Little fella.
Yeah.
Well, smallmouth rely more on sight than any other sense that they have, and I suppose second would be vibration, and these crankbaits give off a lot of vibration.
You can see how visible this is. Now, I've had really good luck with these shorter, broad profile crankbaits too on bass. Things like walleye and pike may go better on the longer type stick baits, but it seems that the bass actually prefer these shorter, broader profile baits.
They have such a tight wobble to them, they give off a lot of vibration, so if you're fishing in a little bit murkier waters, they can key in on the sound, but when the water is this clear, sight would be their main sense that they would use to locate the baits.
This is a storm wigglewort, and it's a fairly high action bait as well. For a small bait, it's got a lot of wobble. So in addition to the rattles in it that send out vibrations, just the bait going through the water sends out a high vibration. And we find that it's probably one of the best baits I've used for smallmouth and largemouth as well.
Hey, that doesn't look like a bass. It's not fighting like one anyway.
Sure had my heart pumping for a minute there.
One long run like that, I would guess it was a pike.
Yeah.
Well, there it is.
Weather's kind of crazy today. It's rain on and off all day long. It's really overcast, and a lot of the fish are just staying up nice and shallow and feeding, and obviously both the pike and the bass are.
You want the net for that?
I think I can get them.
Put up a good scrap anyway.
Got that wrapped around me about 6 times. Pike are really notorious for wrapping themselves up in things. This one's done a good job of that. Whoa.
Good way to go through a lot of crankbaits if you're catching pike.
Yeah. We're not using any leaders here, which you shouldn't unless you are fishing strictly pike or muskie.
Now look at how that one hit. He obviously went after the bait and missed it. I know you're bringing it in with a pretty fast retrieve, but...
Well, he's got lined up all around him, and there we go. Now, here in Echo Bay on Lake of the Woods, you have to use barbless hook. That's one of the rules they have, and it sure makes getting the hooks out a lot easier, even if you don't have to. I'll just give him back. Second here, he's fought pretty hard. I could race for doing that too, I think. The thing about Lake of the Woods, there's so many species of fish in here that you can always catch something. If fishing goes slow on one species, you can always go and catch something else. And crankbaits are probably one of the best ways for looking for fish. Once you find them, there may be better ways of catching them, but for my money anyways, you cast a crankbait, you're going to catch fish.
You can cover a lot of water with a crankbait. What we're doing is just working up and down the shoreline, hitting spots. Now, if we find a spot that's holding fish, we may stop and try and jig them or work some other method, but just to find the fish, to locate them, crankbaits are probably one of the best options that you have. And what we're doing here is just slowly working along the shoreline, trying to cast into spots that are likely bass holding spots, anywhere there's some big rocks or any logs laying down the water. And the most effective way to do this is with an electric trolling motor.
Well, if there's one thing the bow mount trolling motor's done is it's turned pretty well any boat into an effective fishing boat. You've got so much control from the front. And with these new bow mounts, you've got a lot of power. This is a big boat, a heavy boat we're pulling along, and it has no trouble pulling it along. And I'm just steering with my foot, so it leaves both hands free for fishing. Most bass tournaments don't allow you to troll baits, but for the recreational fisher, trolling crankbaits can be equally as effective, or sometimes more effective than casting. So that's something you may want to try too, and the trolling, or the electric trolling motor on the front's really well suited to that.
Now, trolling baits along a shoreline like this allows you to cover a lot of water, and once you do catch fish, it's a good idea to stop and work those areas. You don't want to be starting up your big motor all the time, because smallmouth bass spook real easily, especially when they're in shallow water.
You got happening there, Bob?
I got a hit here.
Something Lake of the Woods, there's so many species of fish in here. Oh, looks like a nice bass. Kind of a nice getaway for us. We were just fishing a tournament last week, and you actually ended up winning that, didn't you, Bob?
Yeah, it was great. Yeah, it was quite an experience. I was pretty thrilled. I'm still really not over it.
Bob and I get asked a lot what our favorite species of fish to fish for is, and undoubtedly we probably spend a lot more time fishing walleye than any species, but it doesn't really mean that's our favorite. My standard answer for that is whatever on the end of the line at that moment's my favorite.
Well, these are sure fun. Put up quite a scrap.
Yeah, they really do.
It's a nice fish.
But there's also, you can catch muskie in this lake, pike, largemouth bass, walleye, perch, crappie, pumpkin seed. There's just a ton of different kinds of fish in here. We're targeting smallmouth today, and that's probably the most targeted fish in here, but doesn't mean you can't go out and catch a pile of other species.
Now, some of the areas that we're fishing are shallow, and there's a lot of weeds along the edge of the rocks, and we have caught quite a few pike. But we are chasing the smallmouth, and we'll get back and see if we can pick up a few more.
Alrighty. Where was that tree last year, Bob, where we had that big bass come up a couple times on us?
Now, bass, if they've got everything that they need close by, lots of feed, lots of cover, they can stay in an area for several, year after year. They'll stay in the same area.
Bob and I fished here last year, and there was just this monster smallmouth. It was an honest 5-6 pounds, and it came up and hit my lure once, and we had it follow a couple times. We never did hook it, and it's hard to forget things like that, so it's one of the first places we headed.
It's worth coming back and trying again, because like I said, if had everything it needs there, it could very possibly still be in this area.
Yeah, for some reason, the bass are a little slow today. Not taking quite as aggressive. We've got a few follows. And it seems sometimes if you just speed your lure up, stop it, speed it up, and stop it, that's when we're getting some of our hits. And that kind of works anytime you're fishing crankbaits. That's a good idea to do, rather than just, a straight retrieve. It often triggers the fish to bite. Okay, let me get out of your way here.
All right. Boy, this thing hit hard. It come right out of the water. Did you see that?
It looked like a
good-sized bass.
Beautiful bass.
Now, spawning is just recently over, and the males, they build the nests
Wow,
and hey, he's giving me a good paddle. Anyways, the males build the nest, and they guard them for 2 or 3 weeks. There you come out again.
Whoa.
2 or 3 weeks after the eggs hatch, he'll guard the fry, and then they move out into their schooling areas after that. But whoa, this is a beautiful fish.
What a fish.
Wow. He got down in the weeds there. He hit like a ton. Whew.
They're sure spunky, aren't they?
It's really important to put fish like this back because after spawning, there's only about 3 or 4% of the eggs that are laid actually hatch and live to be fingerling size. So I'm going to get this way back in as quick as I can.
Oh, is that a big fish?
Wow.
Beautiful.
Got tangled up on the bottom hook here. I might have to get the pliers. I'll get this one back in as quick as I can, TJ.
Okay. Now, like Bob said, the spawn's just over, and during the spawn, the fish are fairly concentrated, but after they finish spawning, they really distribute throughout the lake, and they're really scattered. And we're having a tough time locating a lot of fish today. What we're having to do is just keep working the shorelines, and we're covering miles today, just working the shorelines, casting, and we're picking out the areas that look like they should hold bass and working them hard. But if we catch one, we'll only fish that spot for a few more minutes. If we don't catch another one, we're moving on. There's no sense sitting in a spot for a long, long time. It just won't produce. And I think that's why a lot of people have trouble catching bass at this time of year. They catch one bass and then figure they should stay there for the rest of the day, and you may not catch another one all day long. Now again, in the fall, all those fish will get onto the reefs and they'll school up again, and yes, it is possible to catch 30 or 40 fish. But like I say, cover a lot of ground at this time of year and you're going to be a lot more successful.
These fish are such good sporting fish that there's really no reason to keep them. Once they do school up, they get quite easy to catch, so you can, a couple of fishermen can really do damage. So it's a really good idea to get them back as soon as you can. They're too valuable of a sport fish to kill them. I think he's ready to go.
Beautiful.
TJ, this rain is starting to let up a little bit. It was really coming down a few minutes ago.
Oh, no kidding. A lot of people are head in when it starts to rain, and it's nice and warm out here today. It's not that bad. You know, if we got good rain too, it kind of keeps us dry, and probably being out in the rain is one of the better times to fish.
It can improve the fishing. As you can see, it's calm out, and what the rain will do is break up the surface and allow those smallmouths to come up shallow and feed. They do like to stay out of the bright light, so what the rain does breaks up the surface, and the light doesn't penetrate as much, so they can come into the shallows and feed midday. Now, smallmouth normally feed heaviest at early in the morning and late in the evening when the light isn't as bright, but with the rain or a wave action, they can come in at any time of the day and feed.
Lake of the Woods can be a pretty intimidating place to fish. You look around, it looks like every shoreline and every place should hold fish. So you got to kind of narrow your search down, especially if you're only fishing for a couple days. So a couple of places we're keying in on are long points coming off islands or even off the mainland that have kind of big scattered boulders and extend a long ways into the lake but have adjacent deep water. Another shoreline structure we're looking for is kind of food shelves is what we call them, and it's actually the shelf that goes right up into shore and it may be 4 or 5 feet deep and then breaks off really quickly to deep water. And if it's got scattered rocks on it, again, all the better. So that's kind of what we're looking for today, and it's been producing pretty well for us.
Now, having access to deep water, there's a few advantages. Smallmouth have to have cool water at certain times. They can't stay in warm water for very long, so they'll come up in the shallows and feed, and the shallows can get quite warm. And if they've got access to deep water, again, it's darker, they can stay out of the bright light, and they can cool off. And smallmouth are they have more of homing tendencies than most freshwater fish. They'll come, if all the elements are there, food, shelter, shade, they'll stay in the same area for their whole life. They also go back to the same areas to spawn all the time. So if all the elements are there, they'll stay in that same area. And that's why you'll hear of guys coming back, catching a bass, and going back and catching the same bass time after time over a period of a whole season.
Now up in these shallows, when you go up there, you'll see just perch minnows swimming everywhere, and there's a lot of crayfish live up here. And that's probably the bass's favorite food is those two items, and that's why they are slipping up. And like Bob said, then they'll head back down to the deeper play areas during midday. But hopefully this rain will keep them up here for the whole day.
Well, if they're feeding on perch minnows or other minnows, then they'll have to follow the perch schools around. But with crayfish need certain areas to live in, and that's being the rocks and stuff. So If there's lots of crayfish in the area, then you can guarantee that the bass are going to be there. Just depends on what they're feeding on at that time or what's available to them. I'm using a crankbait that simulates a small perch. And we've seen lots of small perch in here, and a couple of the bass we've caught have coughed out quite a few perch as soon as they're hooked. And we were talking to another angler the other day that said their live well got plugged up with crayfish. Put a few fish in the live well, and they regurgitated these crayfish in the well, and it plugged up the pumps. So you just have to keep checking around different areas, hold different types of bait, and try and match the hatch to whatever the fish are feeding on. There's another one.
It kind of come out in the deeper water, didn't it?
Yeah, we started moving along. Ooh, putting up a scrap. I don't know if it's a smallmouth or not. Just gonna move up to another point up here where there's some rocks sticking out, and I thought I'd cast out and troll my way down and got a hit right away.
A lot of times these bass will slip out off the shore and they'll actually suspend over deeper water. You know, if they're up feeding on 5 feet. Whoa, walleye!
Here's a treat. We've been catching smallmouth and some pike. Haven't got any walleye out of here. I don't think I'll lip this guy.
No, I wouldn't if I was. That's a nice walleye.
Look at the colors here in this clear water. They're just gorgeous.
Well, that's one of the bonuses out here. Lake of the Woods is really known for its walleye fishery. This probably isn't one of the classic ways to catch them. The willy crankbaits, there's no doubt about that.
Well, these storm Hottentots, again, we use these a lot when we're walleye fishing in the tournaments too, but I wasn't expecting this. Whoa! Anyway, well, he's back to where he belongs anyway.
One of the most common problems I hear from anglers is they're having trouble using their bait casting reels. And it's usually not a fault of the reel, it's just that they don't have it set up right for the bait they're using. I'm going to give you a couple tips here that'll improve your casting greatly. The first is to set your spool brake properly. And this is this knob on the right-hand side. And you got to set that for every weight of lure you use. What should happen there when you push the release in, just let your lure fall to the water. And as soon as it touches the water, that spool should stop turning. If it keeps turning, it's too loose, and you want to tighten it up a little bit. Now the second control that most reels have is what's called a magnetic control. And it's on the other side, and it's numbered from 0 to 10. And what that does is stop the spool as it slows down at the end of the cast. So when you're first learning to use your bait caster, set it up as high as it'll go. And what that does is put the magnets closer to the spool, so as the spool starts to slow, it'll actually slow it quicker. Now it reduces your casting distance a little bit, but it'll save you a lot of bird's nests. As you get more proficient at casting, you can keep loosening that, and you'll get down to the point where your casting is 0. On extremely windy days, it may be advantageous to pump that up to 5 or 6 too, just to help prevent that from backlashing. Now I watch most people cast, and everyone casts sidearm, and that works good for them, but it gets to be a problem in a boat when there's other fishermen. When you're casting overhead, everybody wants to hold their reel flat like this and cast straight ahead, and that'll cause you a lot of bird's nests, just by simply turning that reel and holding it like you would a baseball, and just casting it out. Just as the plug hits the water, you want to stop the spool with your thumb. Those few tips are going to help you cast a lot further and save you a lot of aggravation. Well, weather's probably one of the biggest factors that affects the fishing.
Yeah, we've had several weather changes today. 1 minute it's hot and sunny. Rain suits have been off and on a dozen times. Next few minutes it starts pouring rain. I guess that's what happens in the middle of summer.
Well, Bob and I fished a walleye tournament a couple of weeks ago in Saskatchewan, and I think weather probably played one of the most major factors there I've ever seen at a tournament, and Bob actually ended up winning the tournament.
Well, that was a real thrill for me. It was a major tournament win. It was at Sass Landing in southern Saskatchewan. It was on the west end of Lake Diefenbaker, and it's my home tournament, so it had extra special meaning to me. I'm quite thrilled about it, and still really hasn't all set in the whole thrill of winning it.
I'd fished the tournament the week before, just a little further up Diefenbaker Lake, and the temperatures were 3 and 4 degrees Celsius in the mornings. It was really, really cold, and then by the time we got up to Sass Landing the next week during the tournament, it was up 26, 27 degrees, and the fishing went from ultra negative to really active. You got some nice fish there.
Got some really nice fish. We caught a couple of walleye near between 8 and 10 pounds, which give us an edge. And the funny thing was, most of our fish came from real shallow water. We never caught a fish in deeper than 6 feet of water. A lot of them came from 1 to 2 feet. That's something that I know walleye fishermen don't do a lot, is fish the shallows.
Oh, that's really true. Most people think when the sun's shining and it's hot out, you got to fish those 30, 40-foot depths, and that's not true by any means. Well, you want to be where the forage are.
It was real pleasant to fish a tournament wearing shorts and a t-shirt instead of a floater suit or all bundled up to stay warm, but we managed to get fishing in almost every type of weather, from snow to heat, everything in between. So this is kind of nice. We've had lots of changes here, and at least it keeps the guy moving around.
Well, it's not cold either. It's a nice warm rain. It's just wet.
There isn't a better game fish than a smallmouth.
It's been incredible. He's been up in the air 2 or 3 times, and then he'll dive into the boat right to the bottom and just feel drag out. Feels like a heavy fish.
You got to be careful when they do come out of the water like that they don't spit the hook out. You gotta bend down, point your rod towards the fish,
look at that.
so don't give a lot of slack line. Boy, that is a nice fish.
Boy, caught up in the weeds there.
Hey, bud. The perfect game fish.
Oh, you bet. Look at that. That's got to be 3 pounds anyways.
That's gorgeous.
Wow.
Anyway, the equipment we're using today, we're using medium-heavy bait casters, and with bait caster reels, and we've got 10 or 12-pound line on it. Now, you need to have pretty beefy line, because a lot of times we're pulling these fish out of the weeds or close to the rocks. The line is running through the rocks, so you want some tough line. We've got Berkeley XT on here. XT stands for extra tough, and you don't get as many nicks in the line when you're using a heavy line like that.
Oh, that's true. I mean, when we saw when this fish come up, there was a lot of weeds wrapped around there, and we ought to catch them off the rocks, but we're kind of fishing an inside weed edge between the rocks and the weeds. And while you're fighting them, they'll get down those weeds, and you just feel them wrapping around it, and you'll break them off in a hurry. Well, I didn't get him back.
Well, I'm going to get back at it. If there's one of those in here, there's probably another one. Bonus. That's got to be 8-9 pounds.
Oh, what a big fish. We're just working along the steep shoreline here. Man, that's a nice fish. And the light's really been changing a lot here today. And a lot of times that'll trigger these big walleye like this to move up into the shallows and feed. It's not that uncommon here in Lake of the Woods to catch, big walleye like this when you're bass fishing.
Well, that's such a gorgeous color. TJ, I'm going to take a picture of you before you let that go.
Wow, gorgeous. Camera's right there.
Beautiful.
Okay, I'm going to get her back in the water. She fought hard. Fish like that, they kind of give their all. There she goes. Woo.
Right. I just finished changing crankbaits. Put on a crayfish colored Hottentot, about 3rd cast, and there's a nice bass.
We watched a couple of the bass we just caught earlier regurgitate some crayfish claws when they came up. And it was kind of an indication that that's maybe what they were feeding on. So again, like it's those shorter, broad profile baits that seem to be catching the fish with quite wild action.
Well, we've got a lot of vibration too, and I know the fish are keying in on that as well. I'm going to get this guy back in.
Well, it looks like the sun's kind of going down and the day's drawn to a close, Bob.
Join us again next time on Gone Fishing.